after the war, the Allies said, well, it's over. We won. Now it's time to bury the dead properly. Because during the war, you kind of were buried where you fell and people recorded it. So each different country created a team, and the Commonwealth War Graves Commission were formed, and they were in charge of monuments and cemeteries. Lieutenant Colonel Nangle, who was the Padre for the Royal Newfoundland Regiment during the First World War, he's been put in charge of the commemorations and the reburials of Newfoundlanders.
And he was a pretty powerful guy, because when he came back in 1919 to Europe, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission and the Exploits Memorials had basically finished their work, and the decisions were made and the time limit was over. And Nangle screamed, "Hang on, this is unfair. I'm here now representing that little place in the North Atlantic that was so far away that so many of us gave the ultimate sacrifice." And they listened to him, and he put forward a recommendation of having the 5 caribou memorials on the Western Front, 1 in Belgium, 4 in France, and he also suggested to put a caribou memorial in Gallipoli at the site that he thought of the Caribou Hill. So Nangle wanted then to put one in Turkey at the time. He used the term the Trail of the Caribou as his theme for those memorials.
So Nangle was a very interesting individual. His mandate to erect the memorials he saw as a solemn duty, and he would refuse to let people get in the way of him finishing his task. And in doing so, he could be a very difficult person to deal with. But in the end, without that type of devotion and dedication, he wouldn't have been able to accomplish what he had accomplished without having that kind of character.
And Nangle does his assessment, and he comes back in 1919 to the Newfoundland government and says, right, we're going to have the one in St. John's, which is the National War Memorial that exists today. And he recommended 6 caribous. He recommended 1 in Belgium, in Courtrai, or Courtric, 4 in France, which would be the main one at Beaumont-Hamel, Goudencourt, Montchy-le-Preux, and in a town called Manière, which was commemorate the Battle of Cambrai, and 1 in Gallipoli.
He did a special trip back to Gallipoli in March of 1921 to deal with the conditions of the graves that were there, and I think he wanted to solidify his thought on the Gallipoli Memorial. So he still had it in his mind when he left England in March of 1921 that he was still going to recommend the caribou for Caribou Hill. And when he came back over, there were several groups there. And one of the key people at the time in Gallipoli was Lieutenant Colonel Cyril Hughes, and he was with the Imperial War Graves Commission. He was a former officer who fought in Gallipoli with the Australians, and he was thought greatly of, and his opinion was highly respected amongst the Imperial War Graves Commission. And he had met with all parties that were coming over to look for the exploit memorials in Gallipoli, and of course Newfoundland was one. And at the time of Nangle's arrival in March, there was Samuel Seeger, who was a memorial architect from New Zealand. He was there, and they got to know each other quite well, and Seeger was renowned for his work in New Zealand. And while they were there, and they were talking with Colonel Hughes, and Colonel Hughes didn't mince his words. He basically told Nangle and Seeger, in his opinion, as the director of the Gallipoli station for the Imperial War Graves Commission, that there shouldn't be individual monuments put in Gallipoli. He was strong on saying, put all our emphasis on the Cape Helles monument for all of the different fighting forces, and not to do it individually. And he made that, like I said, quite clear to Nangle and Seeger. And Nangle agreed with Colonel Hughes, and he didn't push putting the Caribou monument in Gallipoli.
Right after this, when Nangle goes back, there's a lot of unrest in Turkey. The Commonwealth War Graves Commission people start getting attacked.
One of the factors was the Turkish War of Independence from 1919 to 1924, which created, particularly in the Gallipoli Peninsula, a fair amount of turmoil. The memorial at Cape Helles was unveiled in 1924, and the memorial at Chanakbar was unveiled in 1925. And shortly thereafter, the Commonwealth War Graves, as an entity, because of problems with safety of their workers and vandalism, they ended up being forced to leave the peninsula entirely.
One of the interesting or often forgotten or looked over points about the Gallipoli campaign is we were the invaders. We were the ones that lost, and the Turkish military or the Ottoman Empire were the victors. And one of the key reasons I think they were the victors is because of a person we know today as Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. When he was in school as a young boy, there were lots and lots of Mustafas, and his mathematics teacher gave him the name Kemal, which means smart in his language. He went to the Ottoman Military Academy. He was the commander of the 19th Division in the Gallipoli Peninsula a couple of years before the invasion, so he knew the terrain really well. By the end of the Gallipoli campaign, he was the overall commander of the Anzac sector. And he was wounded. He personally led so many charges. He was a motivator, and he was also willing, and he understood that sometimes sacrifices had to be made. And the biggest one that I can remember is that of the 57th Regiment. And they were withdrawing because they had run out of bullets. And he said, lie down and wait for them to come. When they come up, jump up and stab them with your bayonet. And they did that, and they thwarted an attack. And then later on in the campaign, he says, I'm not ordering you to attack, I'm ordering you to die. And while we die, more people from the rear will come up and take our place, and we will win. In the 57th Regiment, about 3,500 soldiers all died. And later on, he became the father of modern Turkey, who we now know as Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. He understood that the war was over and we needed to make amends, and well, Turkey's part of NATO now, right? So he has a quote that he does, and it's on the monoliths that are all over the Gallipoli Peninsula. And I want to read this, I want to quote it because it's important that you understand how amazing this man was. Those heroes that shed their blood and lost their lives, you are now lying in the soil of a friendly country. Therefore, rest in peace. There was no difference between the Johnnies and the Mehmets to us, where they lay side by side here in this country of ours. You, the mothers who sent their sons from faraway countries, wipe away your tears. Your sons are now lying in our bosom and are in peace. Having lost their lives on this land, they have become our sons as well.
And it wasn't until much later that Ataturk invited the Commonwealth War Graves back to finish their work.
The Commonwealth War Graves work out an agreement with the new leader of Turkey, which is Mustafa Kemal. And for some reason, Newfoundland does not send a representative, and the main monument now becomes a British monument, and the Newfoundlanders never went back and never thought about it or couldn't afford it.
I could never really understand or find out why Nangle himself didn't go back and where other governments were setting up now individual memorials, which was contrary to what Colonel Hughes had stated so strongly to Nangle and Seeger. This was beginning to happen after they went back, but Nangle never went back. And I can see my research had shown me he was extremely busy doing the memorials on the Western Front in both Belgium and France, but he never did such, or the government of Newfoundland formally go back to look at putting that sixth caribou in Gallipoli at Caribou Hill.
And then where does the sixth extra caribou go? And I think that's why there's one in Bowring Park. And the caribou in Gallipoli is never mentioned again until, 10 or 15 years ago when they started talking about it in Newfoundland, saying, why isn't there one? Even though there wasn't a monument in Gallipoli for over a century, Newfoundlanders did not forget those who fought and in so many cases fell in Gallipoli. In 1965, Premier Smallwood led a delegation with several veterans to Gallipoli in commemoration of the 50th anniversary there.
After the ship the Carighanese had docked, the Premier of Newfoundland, accompanied by Sir Leonard Outerbridge and the Honourable Miles Murray, came ashore, followed by the veterans of the regiment. Colonel O'Driscoll, Major Butler, Captain Hicks, George Parsons, Bernard Forsey, Charles Parsons, Albert Delaney, Ron Martin, Captain Sidney Frost. They were greeted by town officials and a guard of honor composed of Turkish soldiers dressed in the uniforms of 1915. The reception in Gallipoli was friendly and warm, and when it was over, the Newfoundland party started out across the peninsula towards the cemeteries of Suvla. They soon found themselves in old farm carts drawn by tractors that brought them through the old battlefields and villages that haven't changed in hundreds of years. And on one occasion, they also found themselves stuck, but this was quickly remedied. At one place, a sapper's tunnel and a trench were preserved. At Hill 10 Cemetery, there were 8 Newfoundland graves. Premier Smallwood placed flowers on each of the Newfoundland markers. As they stopped, they read the names on the stones and the memories returned, and they recalled the night they landed 50 years before.
I especially remember a friend of mine, Roper. He was killed. He was shot through the neck, and I remember helping bury him.
They shall not grow old as we who are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we shall remember them.
In 2015, the Regimental Advisory Council led a trip there for the 100th anniversary of the battle. And in 2019, the Trail of the Caribou Research Group led a pilgrimage there as well.
Newfoundland Regiment is well known for its caribou badge, and the caribou badge obviously has a great similarity to the badge of the Newfoundland Highlanders. The Newfoundland Highlanders were one of the pre-war brigades in St. John's, and it was organized by the Presbyterian Church, founded in 1908 by Victor Gordon. When he was looking for a badge for the Newfoundland Highlanders, the caribou at the time was one of the largest animals in Newfoundland. The tourism industry was just starting to get going, and much of the tourism industry was based around fishing and hunting for caribou. And as well at the time, S.H. Parsons had taken a wonderful picture of the monarch of the topsails, so a picture of a caribou on the top of a rock. And so the caribou was well established as a part of Newfoundland lore. So I think it was the easiest way to develop a uniquely Newfoundland representing cap badge. And there is obvious evidence in pictures that some of these badges they had before they went overseas, a small number were produced, possibly in St. John's, and it's a smaller caribou, and it was easy then to use a small caribou badge both for the epaulets as well as for the cap badge. And that's why I think they chose the badge of the Newfoundland Highlanders.
So the caribou statues are unique. Like, you don't see a monument like them anywhere. And that stance with the caribou up looking, they're all facing a certain direction. And all the caribous, except for the one in Newfoundland, face the direction of advance of the regiment. Discussions of a caribou in Gallipoli began to resurface in earnest after the regiment's pilgrimage to Beaumont-Hamel and France and Flanders for the 90th anniversary of Beaumont-Hamel. It seemed to rekindle an interest and to rejuvenate a province to the memory of the men and women who served in World War I.
It began with our organization sometime back in around 2007, 2008, and officially adopted as one of our mandates in 2009. In 2012, after I joined the RAC, I had gone to Gallipoli to provide a report to the RAC on suitable locations for Caribou Monument in Gallipoli. Before I went on that trip, one of the things I wanted to do was try to determine where Caribou Hill was to. That was one of the objectives in 2012. Because if we were going to put one, then we would like to know where Caribou Hill was. back in 1919, I believe, when the Battle Exploits Committee gave permission for Newfoundland to erect a monument in Gallipoli, it was supposed to go to Caribou Hill. After that, I kind of fall away from it, but I'm never far from earshot of those who are still working on the program. So I'm able to provide assistance. And myself and a couple of other members of the RAC began working and providing information and books to Turkish diplomats to try to help them understand why it was so important for this to be given the go-ahead. But this was going on behind the scenes, while the other side, the government side, and everyone who was doing the negotiations had just about given up. Money had been transferred into the RAC to build it, and they were wondering what's going to happen to the money now because the project wasn't going to go ahead. And then Perry Trimper was asked to go over, and at the time he was Speaker of the House.
1 hour after I became Speaker of the House of Assembly here for Newfoundland and Labrador in August of 2017, the former Speaker and some others invited me to a meeting. And I went into the boardroom and they explained to me that in cooperation and assistance from the Speaker of Quebec, a guy named Jacques Chagnon, and the current ambassador from Turkey to Canada, a guy named Selçuk Ünal, they have been chatting about this idea, could we possibly overcome a century-long impasse and get the final caribou monument established at Gallipoli? And they wondered, would I pick up the torch now as the Speaker and sort of representing as an emissary to the government, continue on those negotiations? Of course, I was very excited to get involved, and I jumped in. And through the fall, we started working on how exactly that needed to be done, because I was representing the entire legislature on a diplomatic front. So reached out to Turkey, and in January and February of 2018, over I go with Larry Weatherby, a gentleman from Tourism, Culture, Industry and Innovation, just the two of us, and we went over there to try to convince the Turkish officials to see if they would come back to St. John's and carry on negotiations so that someday, hopefully, we could finally get a caribou monument, like the one over my shoulder, established at Gallipoli. Well, the meetings went very well. And when we got down to the actual battlefield, after several days of meeting various officials, and so there was a good chemistry, and we could feel that there was some potential for, some good collaboration here. While we were touring the site, actually, it happened that I was with Ismail Kajdemir, a very prominent individual on the Turkish side who really helped to make this all a success. He oversees the battlefield. He's responsible for it. And we were coming off the Azmak cemetery. He said to me suddenly, he said, Perry, he said, would your caribou fit on this little piece of land right here at the side of this Azmak cemetery, which was British land? And he said, if the British would agree, we wouldn't oppose. You could put your caribou monument up there. And I thought, wow, finally, these are words we've been waiting for a long time for our country, for our province to hear. But he said, we have one other suggestion. So we went over to Hill 10 Cemetery. And there, Ismail said to me, there's a triangle of land that extends off from the cemetery. And he said, Perry, there's a piece of land here. This is Turkish land. However, we'd be very proud to host your monument there. What would you think about that? These are words that still send up shivers in my soul. Several days later, we found ourselves in Istanbul, and now I'm meeting with Minister Kurtulmuş, who is the head of tourism and culture for the whole country of Turkey, and excellent discussions with him. And he said, Perry, let's talk about whether we could do this or not. And we moved the interpreters aside. I went around the table. There was sort of a Canadian and a Turkish delegation, and he and I sat and talked a lot about the history of Newfoundland, how we came to this point, how important that conflict was for us, how important it was for us to complete the Trail of the Caribou. That night, following the discussions with Kurtulmuş, the handshake, he said he would follow it up with a letter confirming that the agreement, that the door was open, that we could actually proceed to do this. I called the Premier, and I said, Premier, they've said yes. And it was amazing and remarkable for us both to share that excitement on the phone. The Turks were also saying, do you have one of these monuments left? And I said, well, there's 5 deployed in Western Europe. There's one that sits at Bowring Park in St. John's. Maybe we could use that one. So I asked the Premier that night. I said, what would you think of the citizens of St. John's and the people of Newfoundland and Labrador? Would they agree to just move that monument over? And he slowed me down immediately. He said, there's too much emotional contact with that statue behind us. But, he said, we could make a copy.
We reached out to Turkish officials and for some guidance. And they suggested a contractor that they dealt with, and they're the ones that did the construction. And they knew the ins and outs of how we needed to proceed, what documentation we were going to need, because we were just given a project with no blueprint, permits, or anything to move forward. So the statue was done at a Turkish bronze foundry. And they do mostly garden ornaments, but they do large ornaments for Middle Eastern clients. And when we reached out to them, we had been given a LiDAR scan of the caribou in Bowring Park to use as the base in which to build a 3D model in a computer, which then would be printed on 3D printers. So this is the actual size of the caribou. This is the real deal.
When they finally did manage to get the caribou mounted on its pedestal here in Gallipoli, unfortunately COVID intervened and nobody was here from Newfoundland but one person who happens to work for a mining company in Turkey, and he was there, a Newfoundlander. But otherwise there were no Newfoundlanders here officially to represent the people who fought, and so it's important to us as descendants of those people to be here for the dedication and commemoration.
So I thought it was important that somebody be there on the 20th, because that's when we landed. So we were all there, we're all in our trip shirts, and people had a chance to just visit the caribou and be there by themselves, even though they were with a group. Ruth played the last post. She was the first person to play the last post at all 7 caribous. And then we all had that little drink, right? And then we gave the caribou a drink. And we had a group picture. And it was something that was private and personal for us as a group. Like, I got a picture there with my 3 daughters, and then my 3 daughters and my wife, right? We were the first Newfoundland contingent, per se, to visit the caribou.
So I have a beach rock, a piece of Newfoundland, and I'm going to tuck it away so that it won't easily be seen, but anybody from home who comes and knows it's there will find it and know that this is a piece of Newfoundland.
This ceremony was about what happened there and the men who had served there, and it was quite well done. The speeches were on point. The Premier's speech was amazing.
Today we officially complete the Trail of the Caribou and honor the efforts and sacrifices of the Newfoundland Regiment in Gallipoli.
Bugün burada savaşlarda hayatını kaybeden Newfoundland askerleri için Kanada tarafından yaptırılan Caribou Anıtı'nın açılışı için birlikteyiz.
The ceremony included everybody. There were members from all levels of government. There were members from the Turkish government. We got to lay a wreath and look at the fantastic jobs the kids did. The commitment to remember, read by children. My daughter, Helen, read that. You know, how cool is that?
To them we pledge amid the winds of time to carry their torch and never forget. We will remember them.
I found it really funny that they were asking me, like a 14-year-old, not even at the time I was 13, to just do this super, super important thing. And that made me feel like just so many feelings. It's hard to put into words.
And then when they cut the ribbon, my other daughter, Josie, got to bring up the ribbon scissors. And a funny story is the Turkish representative cut it and took a piece of ribbon, wrapped it around the scissors, and Josie's like, hey, you're supposed to give that back to me. And he just gave it to his aide, right? But like they're 12 and 13, right? And then the three of them, they read out the names of three different soldiers who were killed in Gallipoli.
Private William Frank Hardy, St. John's, Newfoundland, died on September 23rd, 1915, buried in Hill 10 Cemetery. Private James Ellsworth, Carmville, Newfoundland, buried in Asmack Cemetery. This Private Robert John Morris, St. John's, Newfoundland, buried in Larkinshire Landing Cemetery.
So you're looking at 12 and 13-year-olds that are standing in front of this international audience, right? Drones flying around, police as security, and they go up and they read the names of a soldier who died there and where they're buried and what happened to them. And then the three members of our trip that were asked to read about their relatives.
This is my grandfather, Private Howard Leopold Maury of Ferryland, Newfoundland.
This is my great-uncle, Sergeant Stuart Ferguson, from St. John's, Newfoundland.
Great-uncle, Private William Edward Lashana of St. John's, Newfoundland, who served in Gallipoli and was killed in action July 1st.
How amazing was that? But it was a well-done ceremony that was poignant and not about the guests, but about what that caribou represented.
March! Right! Forward!
Türkçe olarak okumaya davet ediyorum. Je suis ravi de vous présenter trois militaires qui vont venir réciter l'acte du souvenir en anglais, français et turc. I am pleased to introduce Captain Chris Miller, Warrant Officer Hannah Goltis, and Sergeant John Jarrett, who will recite the Act of Remembrance in English, French, and Turkish.
Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
This monument was a long time coming. I mean, everybody knows. I mean, it's been in the works for, well, since the last ones were finished. So to get to be the one to get to stand there and unveil it, to get to be the one to conduct the band, it's incredibly special. You know, probably one of, if not, you know, the biggest career highlights for me was to get to do that. Certainly as a member of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment.
Et celle de l'aurore, nous nous souviendrons d'eux.
Güneş her gece batarken ve her sabah onları hatırlayacağız.
I think any Newfoundlander or Labradorian would be incredibly emotional over a day like this, and I'm no different. I welled up a couple of times during the ceremony and touring the cemeteries today, and seeing some of the graves and seeing the standard Newfoundland names and the towns and the ages of those we lost is it's really emotional and provokes a lot of different emotions: guilt, anger, and reverence. And really is humbling the degree of public service that these young men performed for our freedom. So, quite an emotional day.
It was 4.5 years ago. My friend and I stood at about this very same spot, and he said, "You know, Perry, if you want to put a monument, we will take care of it because this is Turkish land. And if you want to put your caribou here, this is a good place." And it was that gesture that we've been working on for the last 4.5 years, and today we mark the completion of that amazing statement. So I thank you, my friend.
Thank you so much.
Kept looking up towards Caribou Hill all through the whole thing and remembering that that's where they were. And just, I hope they can see their caribou. I hope they can.
When the colors marched on, it was like we're bringing these Newfoundlanders home. It's finally complete.
When the band struck up "Let Me Fish Off Cape St. Mary's," then I remembered that the little fishing villages that were decimated by this war, and so I felt
take a picture of me and my dad.
so proud, so privileged to be here.
It's very emotional. It was fantastic to see the regimental colours trooped around the caribou. This is where it all began. And here we are again.
Just a powerful, powerful moment for me. Finished the caribous.
When I saw the color party march in, I think that's when the emotion really hit, and because you've got that piece of Newfoundland that's been completed, Nangel's dream that's been completed, and you have some of the relatives of some of those men in the regiment and other services that are there at the time. But seeing those colors march in and hearing the Ode to Newfoundland, it was absolutely incredibly emotional. I just lost it. Tears went everywhere.
You're waiting for this caribou to happen for so long, and the fact that it took this long to get there, and you're there representing the regiment and representing Newfoundland, to be there, and probably the only time you'll ever get there to see it is just an overwhelming feeling. And you know, it almost compared to the first time I was ever at Beaumont Hamel. You know, you get this overwhelming sense that, you know, people that you know, people that you loved were there, and now they're finally being represented with this big monument.
In my family, my great-great-uncle, Private William Hickey, regimental number 1341, served with the regiment in the First World War. So he landed in Gallipoli and was there for, I guess, a few months before he got sick, and then was eventually evacuated from Gallipoli back to England. He missed Beaumont Hamel and then eventually ended up in Ypres, where he was not only gassed but then eventually killed by shell fire. So to my knowledge, there is no picture of my great-great-uncle, but here is the dead man's penny.
It's been so long, and it's been such a struggle just to get this trip organized. A pandemic and a hurricane and a flood, and now lost luggage and the passing of Her Majesty the Queen and her funeral. But it all kind of came together at the Caribou in a very poignant ceremony for all of those who were there. It's just too bad the whole regiment couldn't come.
I've been to the Trail of Caribou a lot, and I remember the first time I saw the caribous in France and in Belgium, and it said Newfoundland. We figured out that at the time when the caribous were built, we were the Dominion of Newfoundland. And I was really happy and maybe kind of proud that when the caribou in Gallipoli was put in place, it says Newfoundland and Labrador. Because that's who we are now, and that's what we're going to be when we move forward.
I was born in Happy Valley Goose Bay and raised in Northwest River in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. I've been to all the caribou locations, and I've seen the plaques on all of them. In Gallipoli, the plaque is different. It says Newfoundland and Labrador, and it makes me feel a sense of pride that Labradorians are being remembered for their contribution during the war efforts. The whole trip meant a lot to me. Standing on the beach, where I know my uncle probably stood, looking up at the Turkish positions on the mountains, on the hills, just being there, seeing what he may have seen and standing in footsteps he may have taken, the whole thing meant a lot to me.
Padre Thomas Nagel had a vision back after the First World War to place caribous at every major battle site of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment. And he was unable to put one here in Gallipoli in Turkey. And we were here for the dedication of the caribou that was finally put here where Newfoundlanders fought so bravely 107 years ago. So this is a once-in-a-lifetime event for me.
I wondered in my mind about Thomas Nagel, and in the afterlife, if he was looking down upon that ceremony, what would he be thinking? I feel that he would be an awful, happy proud Newfoundlander to see that caribou go there, because I think he would say this is where the Trail of the Caribou began, and that he used that quote, the Trail of the Caribou, and Thomas Nangle would indeed be a happy person to see that in Gallipoli, where our boys are buried.
The most poignant piece for me was not so much the ceremony, but the time I had with Keith, being on the ground, just me and him, having a celebratory drink and having accomplished what we accomplished, and getting to see the caribou for the first time in person for me was extremely moving and emotional. And that is the highlight for me, to know that I had a big part in finishing the First World War Trail of the Caribou.
There's lots of stories out there about bravery and heroism and young soldiers. Like, there was one that turned 14 in the trenches here. Just that every story is important. Every story is important. We laid a wreath wherever we went. Lancashire Landing, Asmack Cemetery, Pink Farm Cemetery, Green Hill Cemetery, Hill 10, the Blockhouse, Caribou Hill, Kangaroo Beach. Everywhere we went, we laid a wreath.
Private George Samuel Knight, Newfoundland Regiment. Enlisted, St. John's, September 7th, 1914, age 21.
Part of the ceremony at each grave was not just laying the wreath, but we said their name out loud. And that was really important, because nobody ever says their name out loud anymore. But we took a beach rock from Newfoundland, and they couldn't come home, so we brought a bit of home to them, and we put it in there. And we did that 25 times on each soldier's grave. We played the Ode, sang by Corporal Harvey from the Newfoundland Regiment Band, and we read the Act of Remembrance. And we all know the Act of Remembrance ends with, we will remember them.
They shall grow not old, as we who are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
975, Private William John Murphy, Newfoundland Regiment. Enlisted St. John's, January 16, 1915, age 29.
Newfoundland Regiment, enlisted St. John's, age 23. Hometown curling, was living in Toronto. Occupation was a fireman.
He enlisted at St. John's on the 8th of March, 1915, at 19 years of age, a young man from Bonavista who was a bank clerk. He was killed in action a few months later on November 27th, 1915.
I think that kept what going through my mind at every ceremony was McCrae's poem, "To you from failing hands we throw the torch, be yours to hold it high." And that's what kept going through my mind every time we did one of those ceremonies. The torch has been thrown to us now to retain their memories.
1095, Private James Joseph Hines, Newfoundland Regiment, enlisted St. John's, occupation Cooper, killed in action November 18, 1915.
May he rest in peace. Amen.
Captain Charles Whiten, Newfoundland Regiment. Enlisted St. John's, September 1st, 1914. He was killed in action November 25th, 1915, and was the first officer of the regiment killed in action.
Number 625, Private James Elwood, Newfoundland Regiment. Enlisted St. John's, December 14th, 1914, age 26.
7, Private James Joseph Thibault, Newfoundland Regiment, enlisted St. John's, January 29th, 1915, age 20. Hometown, St. John's, Lime Street. Occupation, seaman, killed in action December 1st, 1915, bullet wound head. I think you take away with you the immense sacrifice that these people made on behalf of what they thought was a good cause and to hopefully make life better for future generations that they weren't even involved in. So I think that it just gives us, I think, a sense of closure.
I saw it on an arch in a cemetery in France, I guess it was. It pleases me to know that my man died for king and country, but it doesn't bring back my jock. And that's about, I guess there's 1,000 or 100,000 parents that said that, or wives who said, must have said the exact same thing.
Number 44, Private John Dunphy, Newfoundland Regiment, enlisted age 20, St. John's, October 1st, 1914.
1144, Private Edward Boohey, Newfoundland Regiment, enlisted in St. John's, and he died age 19.
295, Private John Fitzgerald, Newfoundland Regiment, enlisted St. John's, October 1st, 1914, age 26. Occupation, druggist.
165, Private Samuel Thomas Lodge. He served in the Newfoundland Regiment and enlisted at St. John's on September 2nd, 1914. His age was 23.
Private Lodge was just a regular infiltrator like everyone else. But he was a large individual, just a large, gentle giant, a caring soul. Everyone in the regiment loved this man. Usually when you hear comments that you hear that a friend died, work goes on and they continue talking. But when he passed, for the next whole day, the regiment was silent because everyone loved him so much.
In the Commonwealth war graves, but they don't have them in Turkey, there's a book that you sign when you were there, right? And every time I go, I sign the book. And that's usually my last thing is I sign the book and it say, you know, I was here, I'm a Newfoundlander. And I close the little gate in the book. There's a little alcove for the book. And you can't do that in Turkey. So what I do in Turkey is I just close the gate and I look into the fields and I just say, thank you. So the 7th caribou is in Gallipoli. And is it the last caribou? I don't know. There might be other reasons to make another one. There might be other conflicts. There might be other information come up. You don't know.